afternoon. My name is Jonathan Levy. I am the Open Data Program Manager for the City of Chicago. And I wanted to give a little bit of background about how we're organized, since that may be relevant. We are, like some programs, but not all, organized out of the IT shop. So we've got a Chief Information Officer with the Chief Data Officer reporting to her, and I report to the Chief Data Officer, who also, relevantly, is over the database administrators, the advanced analytics, and business intelligence. So, beyond open data. First thing I want to say is open data itself is still the thing for us. All of this is around the edges, but open data is where it is. What we've tried to do, though, is in addition to being open about the city's data, as much as possible to use sort of the Washington metaphor, show how the sausage is made. Adds transparency, lets people catch our mistakes, lets people reuse our work if they want to, and ideally even help us improve it. This is useful for both, obviously, internal and external users. And it's not that there's some master plan, roadmap, anything like that. It's more of sort of philosophy we try to follow where we can, and where we see opportunities, we try to do it. So, one example is, who is using our portal? Honestly, don't know. In many cases. Sometimes you talk to people and you find out. Yes, people can register for API keys, sometimes do, but often you don't really know. And honestly, and this is more of sort of a personal statement than on behalf of the city or anything, I think it's good that sometimes we don't know. We're the government. You shouldn't need permission from us to use our data, and you shouldn't even necessarily have to tell us if you don't want to. However, this does raise the issue that if we change something, we may break your app and have no way to let you know, no way to give you a warning. An example on this, and actually not just an example, the reason that we did this status blog in the first place is typo in an API field name. We have one of the first sets of data sets to go live for the City of Chicago was FOIA logs, Freedom of Information Request logs from the various departments. There are 42 of these, which, by the way, I wish there weren't. To me, it would make a lot more sense if we could have one master one for the City of Chicago for various historical reasons and organizational reasons, mostly having to do with the fact that the individual FOIA officers update these data sets. This is more practical, although I've always wanted to do a roll-up data set and may do that one of these days. These have identical field names, sort of. And I'm sure you can't read the text here, but that's fine. There is an API identifier, which is date received. Makes sense. Spelled the usual way that you learned how to in elementary school. In 41 out of 42 cases. One was set up in one case for the police department. The I and the E got reversed. Easy enough to fix on the field name. Any of us who run portals know how to do that. For that matter, easy enough to fix in the API name, except for the fact that if anybody happens to be using this, I'll break it. It's actually better for them better to leave it broken but working than to change it on them. So, our solution on this is we have put out a status blog. By the way, many of these slides will have URLs at the bottom. Don't feel like you need to frantically scribble them down. I'm hoping I'm going to find a way to make this slide deck available. One of the Socrata guys in a previous talk I went to said he was going to make his deck available, so I'll probably find out what he's doing and try to do the same. But at the very least, I will, using the conference tag, tweet out these links afterwards. So this is our blog. Obviously, you can't read it at this distance, but you can get the basic feel for what it looks like. It's just a Tumblr blog. And these are the ways we use it. If we're making changes to existing data sets, such as the example I cited, if there are outages or problems, which does sometimes happen, we've put up, as long as we had it, we've put up some explanations. We deprecate data sets. What do we mean by the word deprecated? I think I've put up some things like, Socrata tips and tricks that we've learned that we think might be useful, some things like that. Advanced notice of data set deletions, and I should mention on that, most of the time it's not truly deletions. One of our rules, it's not a never sort of thing, but once we've got data up, it takes a lot for us to take it down. However, there are cases where we may rework it and put it up in a different format. So that's sort of what we mean by a deletion. And then as long as we've got it, anything else that we think might be useful to technical users. We also have some blogs that are sort of more general, public, things like that. This is aimed at the developers, or at least people who are sort of into the data portal. The irony on this, we actually have not gotten around to fixing that API field name yet. I don't know, watch the blog, and maybe one of these days you'll see that we fixed it. Data dictionary. So as you can anticipate, and any of you who run data portals, I'm sure have the same thing, we can't put everything out there. There's too many data sources. In many cases, there are hundreds of fields. Sometimes things that wouldn't even be particularly interesting because they're for internal bookkeeping and things like that. Some things that'll never be appropriate to publish. Before getting into open data about 3 or 4 years ago, I spent most of my career in public health. The city of Chicago has actually I think they just got rid of it, but for a long time had a really large patient information system. Clearly, we are not going to put out all the patient records on the data portal. However, what we would want to put out is what's the schema of this? What data does the city of Chicago hold? And as a matter of fact, when I first came over to the open data effort, one of the first things I did, since I still had the contacts in public health, was I was asked by the person who was project managing at the time, can you get me the data schema from the vendor for this system? And basically my only warning to her was, since I'd been in the training classes, in all seriousness, if you print this out at a readable size, you can wallpaper a wall. Nonetheless, I got her the schema. It's actually not been loaded yet for basically that reason. It is really big. But like I said, we want to show what we have. And it's an important point that internal users are one of our major potential user bases. The Chief Data Officer himself has said sometimes, I'm responsible for all these data systems in the city, and I don't know where they all are. So this is very valuable to us, as well as a transparency thing. So this is basically what it looks like. It is a joint project with the University of Chicago. If you were to go to this, you would, did I not put the URL up here? I'll make sure to tweet it out. And by the way, almost all of these things, if you were to just Google basically the terms, you're going to find them anyway. But if you go to this, you'll see there's actually not a lot yet. It's sort of at an early stage, but you get sort of the general idea if you look at it. And additionally, it's open at multiple levels. This is a GitHub project. It's out there. We want other people to use it if they would like. And as I say, even better, improve something and send us a pull request. And that's going to be a common theme for many of the things that I talk about. Open source data. Let's start with the one part here that in principle Socrata would not like, because it's where we are basically doing open data outside of their ecosystem. But oh well. For selected geospatial files, and by the way, kidding about that, I think they're actually sort of cool with this, for the reasons I'm about to say. One of the big things is it allows for public corrections. Sometimes, and I'm about to give you an example, there are things we don't know about Chicago that users do know. And one of the other major things is, although our licensing on using the data on the portal is pretty permissive, strictly speaking, for legal reasons, we've got some restrictions there where we can prohibit you from doing certain things. Under the MIT licensing, it's basically out there, and have at it, use it. So these, again, they're just repositories up at GitHub. They are all actually geospatial things, so such things as the bike routes, building footprints, pedway routes, street center lines, and bike racks in Chicago. And some successes. You probably won't be able to read it here, but on the left, that actually is, can't remember if it's a pull request or a response to an issue, but one or the other. Somebody found that we had 4 buildings that were out of date because of some construction that had been done at a public transit station. They told us, we fixed it. Because of the licensing, our street maps have been able to go into OpenStreetMap. This is actually, had I been able to be here last year, and those of you who work for the government will know this one, I got hung up by the budget office and didn't get approval until it was too late. Or actually never got approval, they just never acted on it because it was too late. This is what I would have probably talked about if I'd had a presentation last year. So it's a year old, but I think still relevant. Our Open ETL framework. One of our big things is automating. I realized early on when I came into open data, if we couldn't automate our updates, we were dead in the water. Our data would get stale, or you would have to add staff linearly with adding data sets, and find me a government that is going to be able to afford to do that. We have, as a reference point, we've got at this point I think about 550 data sets. Like I'm finding out many of my colleagues around the country, I hate counting data sets because people always want to know. It's not a terribly useful measure because they're, our crimes data set by itself, I would say, probably provides more value than whatever might be our 50 least valuable data sets. But it's a metric. Most of the ones that are not snapshots, for example, snapshot would be, we put up this year's budget. Basically, that's it. It's fixed. It's never going to change. Most of the ones that are more alive update on a daily or more frequent basis. I did a count this morning, and actually I realized our tracking spreadsheet is a little behind, but we have something on the order of 100 automated ETLs. Of those, let me see, I wrote this down this morning, in the neighborhood of 60-some update daily, which is most of them, usually overnight, and we've got 7 that are hourly or more frequent, as frequent as every 15 minutes. Yes?
What does ETL stand
for? Oh, sorry. Extract, transform, load. The process of pulling data out of the source system and getting it up on the portal. So we put together this framework, which we have shared because we'd love for other people to use our work and, again, improve on it. We use PENTAHO data integration, which goes by the code name KETTLE. It is open source in its own right, although there is a paid support version, which we may someday get. And the main reason for that is I have honestly spent, like probably most people coming up to speed on something, a lot of time probably on Google trying to figure things out that if we had support, I could have opened a ticket, probably gotten a quicker answer. So depending on how you do the accounting, it could potentially be worth it. But we are evidence of the fact you can do this without shelling out a dime. This is one of our transformations. As you can see, it's got a very visual sort of metaphor here. Our previous ETLs were custom written Java. I am not any sort of a programmer. I was able to put this together and, more importantly, free up this Java developer to do other things for the city of Chicago. So you can see basically the way it works is data comes in, it takes a sort of path through various transformations and things, spits out a CSV, which then on the other path just gets fed through data sync. And then we just schedule this with Linux cron jobs. Works really well. This particular one is actually it's sort of cool. The Chicago Park District puts some sensors both in the water and at the beaches at Lake Michigan that are operational from Memorial Day to Labor Day, so looking at it now would not be hugely useful. They have an API, it updates once an hour, and starting in 2014, we go out and we grab those data, and you can look at them on the portal. Again, open at multiple levels. It's a GitHub project. We love it if people reuse it. I was talking to actually another city just this week at this meeting who said that they've made some first steps towards trying to use it, and that's fantastic for us. And in the other direction, so that people can help. Again, within the last few weeks, we'd had an issue out there. Basically, we wrote all this for Linux, and for the most part, this runs Linux, Windows, doesn't matter. There are a few things that are in Linux shell scripts where we'd put an issue out there ourselves that says, hey, if anybody would like to come along and write the equivalent for Windows, we'd love that, and we'll pull it into our project. Somebody actually did that. We'll do a quick code review on that since it's not affecting anything that's currently in operation. It can't really break anything. Due diligence, I suppose we need to make sure that he didn't write, some horrible, something horrible in there, but of course he won't have. And then we'll pull it, which by the way, if you go to use that, most likely it works. This guy seems pretty competent, but if it doesn't, that's what GitHub's for. Open an issue, even better than that, fix it. Open research, and this is sort of highlighting work done by my colleagues in the advanced analytics group. They study City of Chicago processes and try to figure out how to improve them. Collaborative effort with the business units, critically important. If you're going to affect processes, you've got to involve people that do it. And also some external volunteers. In particular, in one case, from what I understand, Allstate Insurance, which is located near Chicago, has one of these programs, I think, that's sort of Google-like, where people can spend a certain amount of their work hours doing something for the public good. And I think the idea was, rather than going out and picking up trash along the highway or whatever, these are data scientists. Let them do data science for the public good. So they gave us a lot of help with this. And one of the important things here is we opened up the methodology here for transparency. It's very important that you be able to see what we've done, for replication in case other people want to do the same thing, and honestly for improvement. And I've heard our chief data officer say basically, we've got our model, it works pretty well, beat it. Yes?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought you had a question. Basically, I'm sure these models can be improved. So one of the most recent ones is food inspections forecasting. Every food establishment in the city of Chicago has to be inspected depending on the type of establishment, anywhere from twice a year to once every 2 years. Previously, they were scheduled on the basis of, I don't want to say the intuition of the supervisors, let me say the long-term, very good subject matter knowledge of the people that run the program. But the question was, can we do better? And the answer is yes, or I wouldn't be presenting this. Maybe we would. Maybe we would present our failures, or at least things that didn't work out. And importantly here, every predictor here is public. I think with one slight exception, the identities of the inspectors had to be fudged a little bit for privacy. And if I recall right, the advanced analytics group sort of grouped them. So you know what group an inspector was in, but not which individual inspector. Everything else is public. All of the inputs into this model come from our data portal with the exception of weather, which obviously you can get a million places, all of which I think actually go back to the same federal government source. Also makes heavy use of the R Socrata package, which is a package that our advanced analytics group wrote to basically use the R statistical package to get data out of a Socrata data set. Works really well. As I say, I am not a programmer of any sort. I've sat down and used this thing, so you can consider that sort of idiot-proofed. And we've got it all up GitHub. And so this is what the food inspectors see. And by the way, sort of the metric here was not do you get inspected or not. Everybody still has to get inspected. It was more if we can predict who's got a serious violation and inspect them sooner, obviously that's less time the public is exposed, more good for the public. That's basically what we're at, is trying to predict over here what's their likelihood of finding a critical violation so that you can get out there sooner. They did basically a I forget how far up it was blinded, but pretty far up blinded trial. Very few people knew which was in which group between the usual system and this system, and found that they were, I forget the metrics, they were getting to things something like 22% faster, and then operationalized it. And so basically, we're working on similar things for some other projects. There's a very similar project that actually preceded this to try to better predict where to bait for rats. Again, coming off of open data, especially such things as 311 complaints about rat sightings, about overflowing trash bins. But an important point, not just the rat sightings, because as I heard somebody discuss at another presentation earlier this week or in some discussion, what you're actually going to get there are the people in the part of town that scream about everything. And honestly, given, if any of you know Chicago, our chief data officer lives in Lakeview and I think would characterize his own neighborhood as one of the ones that screams about everything. So you would not get a good picture just looking at that. It was more trying to look at what are the things that truly do predict where you're going to find rats. At this point, some of this is still internal, but City of Chicago, like every city, does a lot of types of inspections. You can sort of imagine some of the next sorts of inspections we might try to optimize in this way. And by the way, an important point here is we go after things that can be operationalized. There are things that would be really cool, really interesting. We've made the judgment. It would be hard to actually implement them in real life, and we're not looking to do it just for the science, although we definitely have an interest in doing reproducible science. A couple other things quickly here are that we have a homegrown called, quote, Windy Grid, Windy City, situational awareness tool that allows police, Office of Emergency Management and Communications, people like that, to see on a real-time basis tweets, positions of emergency vehicles, 311 requests, positions, all sorts of vehicles. One of our standard examples is there was a bomb scare, and you can kind of, if you go back and look over it historically, you can see things happening in real time. We are going to open source a version of this so that others can adopt it. And finally, I'm down to I think a minute here. There is, Google this if nothing else, there's something called Array of Things that's going to be coming out in Chicago, which is a joint project with the University of Chicago. It's going to put sensors on about 600 light posts around the city, each taking about 6 environmental measures, all of which should eventually be streamed to the data portal. I've been bugging staff about, okay, can you handle our volume for us? And he tells me, yes, he can. And is there a final slide? Yep. And that is it. And I'd hope to have more time for questions, but I will take questions in whatever time we have. Yes?
With regards to the status block, could you tell us about maybe some of the feedback you've gotten or the usage stats around that?
We actually have not tracked usage stats. And Yeah, I can't recall specific feedback. So there is the question, are we doing any good? We're fully aware. The chances that you're actually going to see it, especially if you're not part of sort of the core developer community in Chicago, honestly are fairly low, and it comes under the category of doing what you can. Yes?
Data automation, the way that you're automating it, is that just specifically for enterprise-grade databases, or is it looking at things like Access and other sorts of systems to extract data from?
In principle, I suppose we would do something like that, but I don't think we have. And the usual problems are, making sure that you've got consistent access to it and that sort of a thing. So no, we're not hitting Access databases, Excel spreadsheets. We are hitting, various APIs for various things. Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.